The next item up is SJR 8. Senator Whiting, do you have a committee report?
I do, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee consisting of myself, Senator Chapman signed. Senator Kitty was also there, but politely declined to sign.
In order for opening comments.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how this came about, this is an issue that I've been following and in support of for a number of years. I spent about 4 years out working in the foreign country of Washington, D.C., and came across some language that federal bills that have been introduced to constitutionalize victims' rights. And so when I got to the Senate, this is a top priority for me to better protect victim rights, and so I introduced a constitutional amendment modeled after that. My goal in all of this is to level the playing field between the rights of the defendant and the rights of crime victims. We had a good discussion, I think, at the subcommittee on this, and one of the things that I point out is that while crime is prosecuted by the state, that is, when a defendant commits a crime, the full power and weight of the state come against the individual, we grant them broad constitutional protections, as we should. But most often, the crime is committed against an individual. And so what can we do then to ensure that those victims of crime have robust rights? So I drafted a resolution that had buckets of rights in there. We could just call them buckets or categories. The right to notice and to attend, to be heard, to be proceedings free from reasonable delay, reasonable notice of release or escape, and due consideration of victim safety, dignity, and privacy, and to restitution. We have a code chapter 915 that a lot of people tell me is good, and that some of our colleagues have been to other states and have heard is good. But ultimately, when a defendant's constitutional right conflicts with the victim's statutory right, the defendant's constitutional right is always going to win. And so with that, I introduced this constitutional amendment. However, that said, we do have an amendment, and I'd like to go to the amendment.
In order for the opening comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I gave all that wonderful description and background on how I got to this language, and that's great. What we have now is going to this language, and for those of you keeping score at home, this one's a lot shorter. And what we've done is strip that down to a single sentence that says, the rights of a victim of crime as provided by law shall not be infringed. Now, I'm not wedded to any particular set of words, but I am advancing a principle, and that is to constitutionalize victims' rights. One other piece, just to conclude my opening remarks on all this, is I also have a concern. We're having a sort of a broader criminal justice reform movement across the country, and I sort of share the term that I've heard Senator Cotton apply to it as jailbreak. And I have some concerns about that. And I want to make sure that not lost in this discussion on criminal justice reform is robust protection for victims, for crime victims. And that's not to discount any of the work that we've done as a legislative body over the years and getting to where we're at on 915, our law enforcement agencies that do this, and our members of the community that do this. But I think it's the right time to make sure that those rights are on an equal playing field, and that's why I introduced a constitutional amendment to drive that point home, to say let's not forget about crime victims in this process as well. And those would conclude my opening remarks on the amendment.
Senator Kinney, you're in order.
I'd like to thank Senator Whiting for bringing this amendment forward. This amendment does let us recognize that crime victims do have constitutional rights, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Are there any other questions? In order for closing comments on the amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, as I said before, we come into the legislature, and we all represent the same number of constituents, and sometimes we have ideas that come from our constituents, and sometimes we have ideas that come into our own head from our own experiences, and this is one of those that is important to me, that preceded my time. We don't need to go into a belabored ment of the story, but I've also been a victim of crime. And we talked about this yesterday, and it was not any criticism or anything. of the process, but I felt that we could have done a better job of notifying me on some things, like when this person was released. And so that wasn't a shot at county attorneys or anything. It's just a way to how can we better protect that. And I think this is one of those ways that we can do that. So I'm happy institutionally we're taking this up as the Judiciary Committee. And this is a big personal priority for me. So Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this before the committee, and I would move the amendment.
Short form has been requested on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're back on the bill. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the bill? Senator Taylor, you're in order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eventually, are we just going to put everything in the Constitution? We just can't keep adding volumes to the Constitution. Pretty soon it'll look like our law books, and instead of having this many law books, we'll have a lot of law books or Constitution you can't carry with you. I think we have pretty good victims' rights laws right now in Iowa, probably some of the best in the states. And while I do appreciate the idea, at some point we're just going to have to say we just can't keep adding everything to our Constitution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other comments? You're in order for closing comments, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it is a good question, Senator Taylor. Does this need to be added to the Constitution? And maybe we do. Maybe we have the best victims' rights chapter of code in the entire country. But again, as I said in my opening, whenever a defendant's constitutional right conflicts with a victim's statutory right, the constitutional right's always going to win. And so the purpose of adding it to the Constitution is to afford these rights the same level of legal protection and enforceability, and ensure that when there's a conflict, one doesn't trump the other, but that we find an appropriate resolution through our legal systems. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd move the resolution as amended.
Record's been requested.
Senator Zong.
Yay.
Senator Garrett.
Yay.
Senator Kinney.
Yes.
Senator Bizignano.
Yes.
Senator Chapman.
Aye.
Senator Dawson.
Aye.
Senator Hope.
Yes.
Senator Nunn.
Aye.
Senator Peterson. Aye. Senator Schultz.
Aye.
Senator Shipley.
Aye.
Senator Sinclair. Aye. Senator Sweeney. Aye. Senator Taylor.
Aye.
Senator White.
Yes.
Okay. This passes on to the Senate calendar under Rule 40.